Well, let me begin by saying how flattered I am to be asked by Peter to introduce this conference. The topic is very much um, one of my preoccupations, that we need a much more skilled immigrant workforce. But I have a problem, and it is that our need for skilled workers is creating a serious brain drain. And I think we need to be thinking about that much more than we have. Um, I think part of the roots of the whole migration difficulty across the Mediterranean is that we failed to build up the, the economies and the sort of business structures of sub-Saharan Africa. And we failed because we basically have been drawing talent away from those countries. So I hope that in this conference, it'll be possible to talk about how we introduce some balance, where the training takes place. It seems to me that we should be training people in the countries where migration comes from, as well as pulling people here. And we certainly should be bringing in fewer trained people, but training people once they get to EU countries or European countries. So that briefly is my view on the skilling issue. I want to go off at a bit of a tangent, though. The last couple of months have made me think very seriously about where we're going with the whole political toxicity of immigration. The elections, first to the European Parliament and then local elections in Germany, indeed France as well, all across Europe, we've seen populist electoral victories. And these have been to a very large extent fueled by voters' concerns about immigration. And we now have a European Parliament that may well be disrupted by the two extreme right-wing anti-migrant groupings, Patriots for Europe, 84 MEPs, and then Europe of Sovereign Nations, who are even more virulently anti-migrant, another 30 MEPs. We don't know what they're going to do, but we can be pretty sure that the doings of the European Parliament will not be made easier. How did we get here? My own view is that we got here because European governments have appeased anti-migrant fears and prejudices. And we know that appeasement doesn't work. We know, looking back over the last century, where it got us. And we know that appeasement so far has done nothing but produce more votes for anti-migrant populist parties, not fewer. So what's the answer? I personally think it's time the European governments stopped cowering behind an immigration policy that is slightly milder than those proposed by the AFD, Rassemblement National, all those people, but is nevertheless a policy of raising higher walls and making asylum more difficult. And that's what the new pact, EU Pact on Migration and Asylum, will do when it comes into force in a bit over a year's time. I believe that governments, and I think the pressure groups, well-informed pressure groups like CEIPA, have an important role to play here. If only telling political parties the facts, and a lot of the think tanks who've more or less given up on writing about immigration, telling them the facts that we all know, that aging Europe is going to rob us of 40 million tax-paying members of the active workforce over the next 25 years. 40 million. It is going to leave a huge hole in the European workforce. And I don't like to think what the economic effects of fewer taxpayers and many more pensioners is likely to be, but it's going to produce a series of really nasty fiscal dramas that will make the current one in France look quite mild. So we know that not only is the workforce going to shrink because of the aging problem, but we also know that from the 2040s onwards, Europe as a whole shrinks. The most optimistic forecast is that it will shrink by 80 million people by the end of this century. Other forecasts factor in very stubbornly low and reducing birth rates, and they say we could lose 120 million people. We could be down to a bit over 300 million inhabitants of the European Union. Now, that is a perspective that I think really should worry people, but they don't actually know about it. And I believe that this is where governments should be getting together. In the first place, governments, I think, need the political cover of acting together and of telling these demographic home truths altogether. And secondly, I think governments, instead of accepting the prejudice that economic migrants, asylum seekers don't really want to work, should actually point out that 2/3 of them work within a year of arriving. It's not that they don't want to work. It is, again, coming back to the skills question. They need time to be integrated, housed, skilled, and found a job. And it's a difficult problem. We all know that. But it's essential that we A, tackle it, and B, explain to European electorates why it is important that we should be taking all this trouble. I think that not only government should be saying this, but I think that where possible, business should be saying so. I mean, I was looking at the labour shortage figures the other day, and I see that 5 years ago, about 40% of European companies were polling to say that they had serious labour shortages. That has now gone up to 2/3. 2/3. And in some cases, 3/4. Now, a lack of labour, I think we all know, holds the company back. It eats into your profits, and it ensures you can't grow. So, to bring an end to this long complaint. I think that organizations like CEIPA and the many other organizations around Europe that have a hands-on role with migration and also with demographic change should be helping governments and pressing governments to adopt a common stance, ensuring that the Commission, which, to be fair, the Commission frequently produces reports pointing these things out, but they tend to produce reports in small print, not with screaming headlines. And I hope that somehow von der Leyen's second administration can be really pushed into screaming headlines, warning Europeans of the peril of resisting more migrants, improved migration, skilling of people, both in sub-Saharan Africa and the Arab world, but also in Europe once they reach our shores. And I think that if we ignore these realities, we really do so at our peril. So I finish by wishing the conference a very fruitful discussion of these things and hoping that some of these thoughts might spark thinking on behalf of all the experts who are going to be taking part in the conference. Peter, as ever, it's a great pleasure to work with you. Thank you very much.